Hello fellow Unreal Engine artists, designers and developers, and it's time for another episode of this landscape material series. In this and the next episode we're going to talk about different ways of spawning foliage and other meshes onto your landscape. So this could be used for grass, trees, rocks or anything else you want to put in certain areas. So in this first episode we're going to talk about the standard way of doing this using landscape grass types. It's been around for a long time. And then in the next episode, we're going to talk about procedural content generation, which is a much more sophisticated way of distributing your meshes around the landscape, but it's a little bit harder to do, but with that power comes a lot of flexibility as well. So let's get started. If you remember, we've created 5 layers in our landscape. So we've created our ground layer, mid-low, mid-high, cliffs, and optionally snow layer. And what we're going to do is we're going to set up a landscape grass type for each of those layers, and they will be driven by those masks. So working backwards, the first thing we need to do is set up the landscape grass types themselves. So go into your content browser. Let's create a new folder for this. In your materials folder, let's create, in fact, not in materials, let's do it at the top level because it's not really a material. And we'll create a new folder here called landscape grass types. And within there, we want to create 5 landscape grass types. So if you go into foliage, landscape grass type, and call it GT_snow. So we're going to work down the layers. And then Control D to duplicate and call this one GT cliff. Duplicate again, GT mid high. Duplicate again, GT mid low. And finally, final duplication and call this one GT ground, and do a Control Shift S to save everything. Now if you open one of these up like GT ground, you can see that it has an array of elements. So you can see you can set up as many different varieties of grass that you want. You're not limited to grass, you can use any mesh, so you can use it for trees, rocks, anything you want really. So we'll come back later on and we'll fill that in, but let's close that down for now and go into our master material and start adding these grass types and then connecting the masks. So I've reopened our master landscape material, and if you go to the area where you did your layer blending, just underneath that we'll use that for setting up our landscape grass types. So somewhere in the empty space here, right click and search for landscape grass here, output, and you'll see a new node that says landscape grass. If you go over to the details on the left hand side, we can now set up all our different grass types. So you remember we had 5 of these, so let's add in 4 more. So now we've got 5 elements here, and then we're going to select our different elements. So let's name them snow and select GT snow. And you should be able to figure this out. Next one's called cliff, and we'll select GT cliff. And you need to make sure that all of these are set up, even if you're not going to use them. If you don't select a grass type, this won't work for any of the grass types. So make sure you've set this up properly. Next one, mid high. Choose GT mid high. Mid-low, choose our grass type mid-low, and finally ground, and there should be one left, GT ground. Okay, do a quick save. Okay, and now we have the grass type set up. What we need to do is we need to plug our masks into these different inputs so that that's where it will spawn the foliage. So let's start doing that. It's not quite as straightforward as you might think, because our masks were overlapping. So for example, our mid-high mask wasn't just the mid-high area, it was the mid-high area all the way down to the ground layer. So we're going to have to do a bit of maths to subtract one mask from another. It's not too complicated, but it can catch you out. So let's first of all plug our snow mask in, which is pretty straightforward. So snow, we've got our snow mask here, and nothing needs to change there. We can plug that straight into the landscape grass here. Okay, the next thing we want to do is the cliff. Now, we don't actually have a mask for the cliff. The cliff was everything that was left over after the above the mid-high. So the way we'll get our cliff is to get our mid-high mask, and then we will invert it. So if you click off that and do 1 minus, that will invert this mask. So this mask is going to be everything from the mid-high down, so everything above it is the cliff. But we also have to take the snow into account. If we're not using any snow, that's fine, you can plug it in. But if we're using snow, we need to subtract that mask as well from this cliff mask. So add another node here called subtract, and subtract our, in fact, let's move it along a bit, subtract our snow mask from there. So if we're not using snow, that'll be 0, so it'll stay the same. If we are using snow, it will subtract it, and we'll have just the cliff only, no snow, and plug that into the cliff. Okay, next thing we need to do is we need to plug our mid-high mask in. So you might think, okay, we'll just take the mid-high mask and put it in here, but remember that it includes the mid-low as well. So we need to do some more subtraction to get rid of that. So drag out here and do a subtract. And we're going to plug our mid-low mask into there. And again, so that is the mid-high minus the mid-low mask gives us just the mid-high portion only. And again, if there's snow, we need to get rid of that as well. So duplicate this, plug the mid-high only mask in, and we will delete the snow if there's any there. And let's just line these up with Q. And this is now our mid-high mask, so plug that in there. And we need to keep on going like this. So for the mid-low mask, we need to get the ground slope mask here and duplicate this subtract. Take our mid-low mask, which includes the mid-low and the ground, and then delete the ground from it to leave the mid-low only. And again, if there's any snow that makes it down this low, we need to subtract it from this mask, and then we can plug it into the mid-low. And then finally, we've got the ground mask as well. So we've got the ground one here. We don't have to subtract anything, any other mask, but we do have to get rid of snow. Again, if the snow has come all the way down to this bottom level, so final thing to do is to duplicate the snow subtraction here and plug the ground mask into that. So the ground minus the snow is the ground only, and that can go into there. And then you can come back and comment some of this if you want, but that's pretty much created all of our masks. If you want to test any of those masks out, what you could do is you could temporarily plug these into a base material color and see what they look like. In fact, let's do that for, let's do it for the mid-high, the cliff mask here, see what it looks like. So this is our cliff mask. So let me just drag out of here, do a make. You don't have to do this, it's just to test it out. So that's making a material attributes with the base color of the mask, and then we'll plug that into the output temporarily. Click on save, come back here, and you can see that this is showing just the cliff portions of the mask. Now it does come down quite a way, but that's because it sort of fades out. They overlap slightly. So If you want more separation between the masks, then you can add in things like contrast nodes to make them even more separated. But you'll see when we've done this, these work pretty well. So let's come back out of here and we'll delete this make material attributes, reconnect our output up here. Okay, so now we're ready to test this out. Let's start our testing by spawning some rocks on the ground level. So I've put in the description a link to this small stone from Quixel on Fab. So go into this, add it to your library, and then once you've done that, come back to your project, go into Fab, My Library from the menu, and you should now have this small stone model in your library. So we can click on that, and I've selected medium quality, and then add it to your project. And after a short download time, you'll see the rock and the materials and textures for it. So do a Control-Shift-S to save everything, and this is the item that we'll use. We'll spawn some rocks in the ground level. So close down Fab. Now you'll need to open up the landscape grass type for the ground level. So there's our 5 landscape grass types. If we open up ground, and on the right hand side here you see my open ground asset, and if you click on adding on array elements and open it up, you'll see there's a lot of attributes here you can set. So if you don't have anything in here, then nothing gets spawned. That's the default behavior. So let's choose our mesh. It's saying grass mesh, but actually you can use this for any mesh you like. So let us put in type rock, stone, and you should find this one with a strange name, tier 2. And then you've got the grass density. I suggest you set that pretty low, so set that to something like 1 to start off with. We'll see what that looks like in a minute. Use grid has it in a grid-like pattern of lines in the X and Y. We want it more random than that, so turn that off. You can then have cull distances. So 10,000 units is where it's going to start to stop showing this mesh, and then another 10,000, and then 10,000 is where it will stop showing it. So actually it's going to stop showing it straight away. We'll play around with that in a minute and see if we need to change that. What other things there are here? Random rotation is on by default. You usually want that on because you don't want all of your meshes facing the same way. And align to surface will have the mesh showing in the same direction as the normal or the slope of the landscape. So if it's quite sloped, it will face out in the slope direction. For things like rocks and grass, that's usually fine to leave it, but if you have a tree, you don't want it to grow at too strange an angle. So if you turn that off, it will grow up vertically, which is what you want. And everything else you can probably figure out, or it's not relevant. Now, that's all you've got in the landscape grass types. You've got very limited options. You really just specify the density of the meshes. You can't choose where you want to place them, how you want to place them. You can't choose whether to have collision or not. I know most times you don't want collision with small stones and grass, but you do with trees. So when we do PCG in the next episode, you'll see that you have far more options available as to how you do it, including sort of more randomness as well. Now we've done this, I'll just wait until it auto-saves, and then we'll see what it looks like. So if we go over to the valley, we need to resave our material so that it uses the regular output. And hopefully if I go down, there should be some stones. I can't see them at the moment. Let's have a look at the scale here. So if we go back to our ground type, you can see that the scale is minimum 1, max 1. Maybe they are too small to see. So let's do from 5 to 20 on the scale. Okay, and still I'm not seeing anything at the moment, so that's okay. Things like this happen, so we need to troubleshoot what the problem is. So the first thing I'm going to do is to see if the mask is working. So let's go back to our material. This is our ground mask, so we're taking the ground mask and subtracting any snow that's there. So let's do a make material attributes, and let's plug the output that we're expecting, going into that ground type, into the base color, and then plug that output into the final output. Let's see if the mask is correct to start off with. So click on save, and yep, you can see that that valley here is lit up white. So that means that the grass types are indeed being set up. Okay, so let's click on save there. And let's go back to the landscape here, reconnect the regular output, delete that and save. And let's just check our landscape grass nodes. So we have got the one that says ground is using GT ground.
A few moments later.
So I took a couple of minutes fiddling around to try and figure out what the problem was. I think this might be because I was doing some other testing, but so your rocks may have appeared. You see mine are there now. If they didn't, what I actually did was if you go to the build menu here, you can rebuild the landscape, you can rebuild the grass map, so you can try those. But what I actually had to do was in the command console down here, if you type grass, there's a flush cache option here. So I did that, and that got rid of any other grass maps that were there. And then I went back up here and did build grass maps or build landscape or both. So that's hopefully you didn't get the same problem, but if you did, try a combination of those things. And now you can see I've got all the rocks there. So I don't want quite this many in my landscape, so you can see they range in size because I put a scale between 5 and 20. So let's change the grass density down to 0.2 and click save, and you can see now I've just got a few rocks or stones dotted around. They're quite bright, so let's see if we can adjust the material to blend them in a bit more, although we'll be talking about blending when we do the episode on runtime virtual textures, but it'd be useful to get them to look as though they're part of this landscape. So in your landscape grass type, just use the browse here to find the rock, and you can see the material instance here. Double click to open that up, and you can see that we have some parameters here. So if you open up the base color, we could change the brightness and make that, instead of 1, make that 0.3. So already it looks as though it is more of the same material as the ground. And also in the specular, it's got a specular factor of 0.5. If we make that 0, it just makes it slightly less reflective, and again looks more like it's part of the ground there. So as a first pass at doing a landscape grass type, that was pretty successful. Let's now move on and create some actual grass in the mid-low level where the grass is. I've provided a link in the description to this pack of foliage from Fab. Hopefully it's still free when you're watching this video. You can see it contains a wide variety of grasses, flowers and other plants. So add that to your collection. You can see I've already got it in my library. And if I then come into my project, go into Fab and my library and search for it here. Yours will probably be at the top here, mine's somewhere hidden within the hundreds of assets I own. So let's do temperate vegetation, and it's this one here, temperate vegetation foliage collection, and just click on it and do add to project. There's quite a few assets in here, so it might take a little while to download and install, so I'll be back with you once it's downloaded. So that took a few minutes to download for me. That's because it's got about 300 meshes in there, different assets. In fact, it's got other blueprints and items as well that we probably didn't need. So let's go into the meshes and have a look what we've got. We got 3 different folders: grasses, flowers and plants. If we go into grasses, you can see that there's lots of different options available here. So we'll just use a couple in our mid-low mask in order to show off how you do this. This can also do, I think, wind animation, so that you can have the flowers swaying, but be aware that you want to probably have that switched off in the distance so that it doesn't use up too many resources. I don't think it's on by default, so it won't be an issue. So let's shut this down for now. Let's shut down the fab window. And now what we'll do is we will play around with our grass type for the mid-low layer, which is where this grass is here. Let me just move over slightly to a grass section so we can see it when it works. Okay, so I'm going to open up Content Browser, go back to the Landscape Grass Types folder and open up the grass type mid-low, which should be empty at the moment. And we'll add one grass type and then we'll add another one in a moment. So add the first one, and let's first of all change the grass density because I don't want to spawn too much in the first instance. So let's change the density to 10 per meter and choose one of those grasses. So if you type grass, I'm going to start off with grass 0103 here. And you can see that it spawns here. It's very bright at the moment, so we'll probably want to play around with the material later. But if we go a bit closer, you can see that it's a nice clump of grass here. So we can probably double that density, so make that 20. And you can see that we've got more grasses there. And it's all one size at the moment and a bit small. So what we'll do is we'll go down to the scaling. And we've got it on uniform scaling at the moment, which means it's going to scale the same on all axes. Usually that's what you want. So we'll start with a minimum of twice the scale and a maximum of 5 times the scale. And you can see that we now have some very luminous grass of different scale here. So let's come out here. Other things we can do is we can look at the culling distances as well. We didn't really look at that with the stones. Obviously, if you don't have any culling distance at all, it'll show all the way over your landscape, but it will be a big performance hit. So what we'll do is, instead of, at the moment, it's starting at culling at 10,000 units and ending at 10,000. So that's a hard stop at 10,000. What we'll actually do is we'll start culling at 5,000 and end culling at 10,000. And so you should get a bit of a fade out between where it starts culling and where it stops culling. We really need to fix this material color though, but let's do that in a moment. Is there anything else we want to change? Don't think so. We want random rotation, align to surface so it's going in the same direction as the slope. That's fine. Everything else looks pretty okay. So let's create another grass type. So let's just close that one down. In the drop down here, just duplicate it and we'll choose another grass type. So for the second one, I'm going to start typing grass and I'm going to go down to grass 0603. So you can see there's lots of them here. And this grass 0603 is like a wheat grass here. And you can see that it's got the sort of tall and feathery at the top, so it sort of complements the other grass that's there, apart from the colour. And what we'll do is we'll make that half the density, so it doesn't appear as often. So we get more of the grass clumps and the wheat grass. Okay, so that's actually working fine. So you can see that we've even got some over here because we've got these little verges of grass here. But you can see that those masks and the landscape grass types are keeping separate the ground area with the rocks and the grass area with the grass types in. And you may say, well, it's very obvious where it's ending at the moment. Part of that is because of the fact that these grasses are so bright. Once you blend them so they blend into the landscape, it won't be as noticeable when they cull in the distance, because by that point they'll have faded into the colour of the background anyway. So let's take a moment, even though it's not really part of the grass types, let's take a moment just to adjust these materials just so they blend in a bit more. So I've zoomed in close up to these grasses so I can see the changes against the landscape. If you open the grass type for the mid-low, the one we just set up, let's start off with our first grass type. So with the grass mesh here, you can browse to it in the content browser. Double click to open it up, and then you'll see there's a material here. Browse to that and open that up, and you should see various parameters here. So here's where things like the wind animation is here. So I don't think it's moving in the wind. Actually, it is slightly there. So you probably want to consider switching that off. Let's look at that later. Let's just get the color sorted out first, and we'll look at the animation separately. So material parameters, you can see there's various options here for brightness, color variation, saturation. So first thing I want to change is the tint. That's the main one, I think. Could change the brightness as well, but they do very similar things. So let's go into the tint here, and in the value here, let's change the value. You can either use this slide or you can type in a value here. Let me do 0.2, and you can see that's brought it down quite a lot already there. Let's click OK here. Other things you can do is we can remove the specular like we did with the stone. We can remove subsurface color, that's a slight luminosity at the edges of the leaf. That just makes them a bit darker there. They're already looking a bit better here. And again, we can play around with that a bit more. Let's have a look at the brightness as well. Yeah, that's probably a bit too dark. So we want them to match the ground underneath, but we don't want them to be too light, but we don't want them to be too dark either. So that's not far off. And when we do the runtime virtual texture blending, they're going to take on the colors underneath anyway, so that will further cement them into the landscape. So I think that's okay for the main clump of grass. So let's save that and close this down. Now let's go to our second grass here, this wheat grass, and do the same thing. So browse to the mesh, open it up, browse to the material, open it up, and again you've got the same sort of parameters here. So let's start off with the tint here, and I'm going to make this 0.1, and you can see straight away that's blended in here. We don't need to do much more than that. Again, maybe I'll just change the specular and the subsurface strength to 0 as well. The other thing you can do, actually let's do this with the main one, is you can see how they're all the same shade of green at the moment. Can you see there's this color variation option here? If I show you it with the wheat here, if I select this, let's put this on a really high value like 1, you can see that it has a rainbow of colors now because each color is different. Now, obviously that's unrealistic, but if you dial it down a bit, like 0.1 here, there's some slight differences in those colors. You don't notice it so much on the wheat, but let's do it on the grass. So let's close that down, go back to our main grass, open it up, open up the material, and here's the color variation for that. So if we do something like 0.1, you can see that now those grasses go between sort of a lighter green and a darker green, and they're still a little bit too luminous for my liking. So again, you can do things like saturation. Let's maybe make the saturation half, and that's made them so they're less vivid color. Again, you can play around with these. This is where your art direction takes control and you decide what you want to look. Actually, that's probably too much variation, so let's go back to roughly what it was, sort of 0.05, sort of half of it. I'm actually going to put the saturation back up because I do like having the green in there, and as I said, once we blend it into the color underneath, it's going to look pretty good. So let's stick with that, and we'll call it a day for today's tutorial. So you can obviously play around with this, and you can add more grasses to this layer. You can go to the other layers. Maybe you want to add some stones or boulders on the mid-high layer. So play around with this. Now you know the techniques, and you can do that. Let's just talk about wind animation briefly. So if we go into here, let's talk about, obviously wind animation is going to have an effect on performance because, well, for a few reasons. Obviously it's having to do a bit more work in order to have to move these vertices around across the distance, but also something else happens, which is that the shadows that are cast by these meshes are constantly having to be recalculated. And the way, if you're using, which is by default, Lumen and virtual shadow maps with Unreal Engine 5, if things aren't moving, then it doesn't have to recalculate the shadows from frame to frame. But if things are moving, it does. So if you go into the lit virtual shadow map cached page, can you see how where this grass is, all of these pages here are blue, which means that the shadows are having to be recalculated regularly, whereas in the distance where there's no grass, it's green. So that's much better for performance. So there are a couple of ways we can deal with this. We can either switch the animation off completely, or we can set a limit on the distance that animation takes place. And that's an option within our landscape grass types as well. So let's go back to lit mode just briefly. So you can see that I think they're both moving slightly. Yeah, they're both moving. So let's go back to, well, we're in the main grass type here. So in the wind parameters, let's have a look. Oh, here we go. So in this section 4, you've got various options. So you've got different wind checkboxes. So if we uncheck everything, then it should stop moving at all. So for the main grass, I'm going to turn it off completely. I'm going to leave it on for the wheatgrass, and we'll look at if we can disable it at a distance. So save this one. Come out of here, and in our landscape grass type for this mid-low mask, open up the second item, which is this wheat grass, and somewhere down near the bottom there's this parameter, instance world position offset disable distance. So world position offset is something that the materials use to animate the vertices of the mesh. So at the moment it's set to 0, so that means that the world position offsets are not disabled at all. But if we put a value in there, it'll act like the culling distance. So if we put a distance of something like 100, and after it recalculates, you can see that everything is pretty much still at the moment. I think that number is so small that even this one in the foreground is disabled. But if we make it something like 500, right, now you can see that this one in the foreground is still moving, but these ones in the background have stopped moving. And that's probably what you want to do, because you're only going to really see the movement as you're close to these objects, and in the distance you're not really going to notice it much anyway. And that should have an effect on the caching of the shadow. So if we go back into that virtual shadow map cached page, can you see now that we just have this very small blue square for the plants that are around us that are moving, and now all these other ones are green, which means the shadows don't have to be recalculated. And that can save quite a few frames in your final project. Okay, so we actually covered a few more things than just the basic landscape grass types today, but I hope you found them useful. And in the next episode, we're going to look at another way of generating your foliage, rocks, trees, etc., using procedural content generation. This is far more flexible, arguably more complicated as well, because there's many more things you can set up in it. But it's not something you have to choose between. You can use a combination of landscape grass types to just scatter your basic items around the different areas of your landscape, and then you can use PCG to be more specific about what you want to do. So stay tuned for that one, and I'll see you the next time. Bye for now.